Well, that's the theme song for All About Aesthetics. Although I took some liberties with it and I quoted something at the end. Could you tell what I quoted? Actually a really, 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 really great song. I probably should not have done that to the song. It's so great. Anyhow, that working title of that is Bob Fosse, and that's kind of me having fun with improvisation. So taking themes, taking songs, sometimes my own music, sometimes famous music from famous people, and seeing what you could do to develop it. And while I'm at the piano, I'm just going to have, just for fun, talk a little bit about that. So the origin of that, I don't know, as a motif, is really the show Chicago. You know, so... But yeah, there's that, all that jazz and all that kind of stuff. That kind of commercialized, and I'm using that word not in an evaluative sense, just descriptive, Broadway commercialized interpretation of what they would call old time music. And, that kind of, I'm just having fun, but that's a language unto itself. Like all the gestures I just played off the cuff are part of a self-enclosed, not hermetically sealed, because it's drawing influences from Africa and from Cuba and heaven knows the universe, cosmos. It's not hermetically sealed, but it's sort of onto itself. In other words, it's like kind of like any language, there are words not in that language, and it's got its own syntax. And so one of the joys for me of being a musician, the kind of musician that I am, is that I get very curious. Now, I quoted that very famous song because that's a sneak preview of something I'm going to do in February, actually. I don't want to talk too much about it, but I'm going to what I'm going to do is that in the stream, I'm going to do a live stream like this, and I'm going to learn a song during the stream, a song I don't really know, a song I've never played. It's a song I've heard, so it will be a known piece, not my own. I'm going to learn a song. And I'm going to sort of put a focus, a spotlight on what I do when I learn a piece of music. When I learn a piece of music, how I absorb it, how I use my language, I take it into my nervous system and it becomes a part of me. How it starts from a place of love. So when I learn anything, I start from loving the thing. It's just a decision I make, And I understand that when I love the thing, the song, the novel, the John Updike Rabbit books, whatever it is, that I'm loving something that has imperfections. It's not holy writ. There are flaws in all great works of art, even Beethoven, even Shakespeare. But what I'm saying is that, I start from a place of, I love this thing. I want to learn it. I want to learn its secrets, its mysteries, and bring it into my nervous system. And then in turn, I become a different person, slightly different, still the same Mitch, alas and alack. I'm stuck with me. But what I'm saying is that, I'm going to enlarge, I'm going to grow. And so in February, I think it's going to do this February, I'm going to sit down and say, well, how do I learn a piece of music? And study its chords and do a close reading of the music. So I'm going to do that. So welcome to Journey of an Aesthete podcast. I am Mitch Hampton, of course, and we're at 300 subscribers for our show, which is a real exciting bit of news because it means we're growing. And so if you want to be 301, 302, come on board. We'd love to have you and subscribe. I want to do some admin type of stuff and talk about what's going on where the show is now. At the beginning of my Annie Dillard show, I discussed the Hurricane Elaine and its effects. Actually, for quite a bit in the opening of that before we got to Annie Dillard's book. And so that's the context and background, of course. And my last aesthetics episode was on an Amtrak train. And now I'm back in my home. This is my living room. This is my familiar chairs, my 1979 Steinway piano. So we're going to do something rather similar to what we've been doing. But I'm going to keep the theme of, for lack of a better word, universality. I guess I should put that in quotes because I don't think there are human-made things that are completely universal. But there are human-made things, I feel, not in our, by the way, not now, currently, because we're in an era in which that's not something even people want to do, which is an interesting philosophic question unto itself. But what I'm saying is in early eras, certainly the analog era, people had pretensions to universality. They would make things for sort of everybody. They thought they were making things for everybody. Now, of course, you could critique it and say, well, it wasn't just everybody. It was just light-skinned folks, or it was just this group or that group or just the elites. You could poke holes in it, if you will. But there was actually a sincere act of will on the part of mass creators, mass manufacturers, producers, even fine artists and highbrow artists, as well as commercial, everybody was interested in sort of trying to speak to everybody, and that was a project. And I'm not going to get into it all in this episode because we're going to have many future episodes on this theme, and we're also going to start with design and raw materials because that's what I want to talk about because I talked about the train. So I'm going to go over here and get comfortable. Have so much to discuss. So what I'm saying is I have some shows coming up. Next Sunday I'm doing a piano concert right here. It's a holiday concert. And it's Sunday at 7, and if you can tune in, that would be great. It's going to be some surprises, but there's be a little bit of familiar music, familiar music for that. There's a gallery in Montana, and we're going to have this month a discussion with a husband and wife that runs the gallery. I believe that's on the 19th, so that's some of what's coming up. And what's coming up is this episode now, today. So let me focus on the present if I can. So where to begin? Okay, another thing that we're gonna do is that we're gonna just introduce some ideas. Charles Jenks, the great architectural critic, scholar. One of my favorites. He was a dream guest, but he's passed. But he was on that long list of dream guests. Was one of the theorists of what we call postmodernism, and I consider myself in part a postmodernist, believe it or not. I stand by the label. But he wrote much on that topic and the effect of design on consciousness and cultures and. He's like me. He was a pluralist. I'm a pluralist, and he has this wonderful book that he wrote in 1969 called Ad Hocism and the Spirit of Improvisation. 69. So I ordered an first edition of his book, and I'm going to introduce here into these episodes Ad Hocism. And of course, ad hoc is to add things on in a kind of, as you go, not pre-planned, but sort of improvisatory and the spirit of DIY and do-it-yourself and the spirit of recycling and repurposing. And I would go so far myself, if you ask me, to say that that's actually truer to the spirit of what humanity is sort of doing much of the time, whatever we might say. So we may tell ourselves a story that, we're executing this plan that we designed this morning or 10 years ago, but in fact, we're sort of a little bit making it up and as we go along and changing our mind and, being human, basically. But ad hocism came out of surrealism and sort of an attempt to deal with a pluralistic culture and society, and sort of basically the impulse is what it would look like if we lived up to the promise. And so it's a promise and a reality. The promise of pluralism. What would that look like, right? And also what it would look like So that's seeing pluralism in a more normative sense. That's a philosophic term, meaning it's kind of evaluative, that it's a good thing we are pluralistic. But there's also the sense at the end of the day that we're pluralists in the way that, we're indoors and it's winter now in December. There's a kind of objectivity that, we show up very different from each other. And as I said at the outset, we don't know what to do. Right now, in particular, we're having a great deal of trouble tolerating that difference. And one thing that the computers that might run our lives like to do is to make two teams, and so we all fight each other. And that's actually really quite awful at times. On the other hand, you could say that, I don't know. I don't want to speaking of improvisation, too extemporaneously on that topic, because I have so much to share. So where do we begin? Well, pluralism, postmodernism, Charles Jenks. Christmas is upon us, so I have a little Christmas cheer here. This is here's my Farrah cup. 1 second. Coffee. But I actually have, of course I have this. This is Farrah in 1977, December, the Gala Christmas issue. See, it says Farrah comes back big because she had left Charlie's Angels when this magazine came out. And so they make some publicity stunt of like, she's returned to the show and we missed you and all that. It's just a way to generate sales and to make money for Farrah Fawcett and Hugh Hefner and his empire, etc., such as it was. And but what's really interesting to me, more than Farrah, is John Travolta steps out, a very candid interview. So I'm tempted to open this up now and read John Travolta talk about making Saturday Night Fever, but we're not going to do that. It's just a little tease of Farrah. They did it again in 95. Farrah again, holiday pictorial. 77 and 95. Notice the change in this magazine. So this is a magazine that's on the way to going away, saying bye-bye. That's why it's so thin. Like most of this is ads and ads for not cameras, but sports cars and gadgets and just crap. So it's on the way out in a way. So it's getting thinner. But I think to myself, maybe it's anticipating the internet, and that even though it's the mid-90s, it's almost like the powers that be know physical media. We're getting rid of the physical. Everybody's going to do everything on the screen on the computer. So let's just take away pages or its budget. But think about this. It's like big fat magazine. Think about that. Most of this is not photos of naked women. Most of this damn magazine are interviews about politics and discussions with writers and talking to John Travolta and fiction and poetry, and there's illustrations and there's, it's just unbelievable. So I don't know. I have a retro sensibility here on my podcast, so I'm interested in physical media. I'm interested in things that take up volume and mass, that take up space in the world, that aren't just a miniature, like these magazines. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at that. More surprises. I have a lot of if there was any chance that you thought there were too few blondes in this episode on our show, my apologies to the brunettes and redheads, who I love equally, actually, but they dug up Suzanne Summers in 1985, a Gala Christmas issue. So again, I'm just showing you the covers. I'm not looking inside. I'm tempted to do so. One more blonde. I have to prepare the context for this. So in the 80s, there was a magazine called Spy. Anybody remember Spy? Spy was it was sort of like Adbusters without the preachiness, if that makes any sense. It was kind of a satire of culture, and it was very humor based. And Fran Lebowitz wrote for Spy, as did Graydon Carter before he went to Vanity Fair. I have a couple of original issues of Spy in my possession. And I'm a 70s guy, and drum roll, wait till you see this. The New York Monthly, December 1988, Terry Garr celebrates the 70s. This, a return to the decade of mood rings, ultra suede sideburns, and disco, what does that say? Disco, sex, and Tony Orlando, 70-something. And there's Terry Garr playing that 70s chick with her sway. And this is Terry Garr in her prime. Yeah, this is Terry Garr in her prime. This one I'm going to open up. Okay, and get out my glasses. So, because you should know about Spy Magazine. It's a little bit like, Spy Magazine, hey, is as important as Interview Magazine or Rare or Partisan Review or any of those. So let's see what's in here. This was what Spy looked like inside in the 80s. They had these little tiny print. And they're telling us the 70s are back in 1988. This was 4 years after I had my dream of the 70s. So remember, I had that dream and woke up laughing in 85. And here it is 3 years later, and Spy comes out with this. And that's the reason why I probably got this. Speaking of old-fashioned, antiquated media, do you folks remember this ad, if you're old enough to remember this ad? This high-fidelity type of ad with the dude getting blown away. Yeah. Iconic ad from the dude getting blown away by the speakers. Yep. The power of the delivers higher fidelity. Here goes a little. So let's see what they have to say about the 70s. I mean, it's kind of again, Spy's aesthetic was tiny print. Tiny print. They were trying to squeeze a lot of stuff in. And so they had, this is their 70s. And they had these little lists of things here. Not that, that's let me show here. Where we go here. There's an article about Roller Boogie with Linda Blair. They say the 70s ended with that movie. I'm not so sure. I think the 70s ended in 83, a few years later. But that's one man's opinion. But it would be interesting to look at read some of the sort of the features of to get a taste of the humor of Spy, the kind of humor. Bear with me. This is an article on New York acting teachers, so it took me a while to find something gold, and here it is. It says, ACT, the caring, sharing, feeling sadism of New York acting teachers. Let's see here. Yeah. They have a Spy dramatization of what the acting students have to go through. I like this gentleman's mullet here. It's very nice. I'll just quote something from here. Now, again, this is on the Spy Magazine is on the border between actual reporting and sort of comedy, so quite right in the middle there. In order to get anything out of acting teachers, you have to trust their judgment, says one embittered actress. If a teacher hooks you in, you'll put bad money after good to convince yourself you're not getting screwed. It's like a bad relationship. You've put a lot of time and energy into it, and no matter how bad it gets, you convince yourself that it's bound to get better, but it doesn't. This actress is a former student of Paul Mann, whom she refers to as that fat pig. Mann was arguably the worst acting teacher of all time. This group theater veteran finally became famous in 1979 when a few of his female students at the Paul Mann Actors Workshop complained that Mann had broadened the syllabus to include sensory exercises such as giving him blowjobs in the dark and opening up exercises that included groveling at his feet and repeating, "I am your slave." His preferred, so this is like kind of an expose of a toxic acting teacher, you know, and that's what, but the thing about Spy, Spy was on to current events in a way few other people were. So there's a lot of articles in Spy about the awfulness of a certain current most famous celebrity, and about all the chicanery and things that he's doing. So there's a lot of things in that. So Spy was very much a New York magazine. And so that's enough about. I've spent too much time on Spy. I was going to talk about raw materials. Now on Amtrak we had dealing with these kind of very hard materials, you know, the kind of things that would have to withstand a lot of torture and punishment from its motion, you know, and from the passengers, you know. Like a Wilton weave carpet that never gets totally worn, you know. It takes a lot of beating, you know. I forgot to talk about what I'm wearing. So this sport coat is a traditional tweed. It's a Glen plaid. And the cloth, I think, is from 1974. And it's one of the last things I had made from Charlie Davidson on the Andover shop. So this jacket comes from, sport coat comes from 2014, 2015. But again, the fabric, as you can see here, if you'll just trying to get you to see the, ignore my punim there and just look at that. So this fabric was in sort of somewhere in there, and I pulled it out and had it made, which is interesting, right? And Charlie, in this photograph here, that's Charlie. He was about 89 years old, and he was a great friend of mine, and I still miss him. And he was friends with Duke Ellington and Miles Davis. I mean, there's a whole, I could go on and on about all that. I mean, he, yeah, and other people. He was a jazz buff and a World War II hero, and had this men's store in Cambridge, Massachusetts since 1949. Imagine that, 1949 to 2015, I'm there ordering something. So I've accessorized it with this polka dot chocolate brown silk shantan tie. I've got just a handkerchief, simple shirt, nothing really fancy, nothing important really. Although to me this sport coat is important. So that's a little bit about the clothes. I always like to mention it because we're talking about, after all, about I'm sort of calling into question this notion of packaging and content, decoration and substance. I mean, these are very false. As you know, I'm a bit of contrarian. I think form and decoration might be more important, and that oftentimes the form of something dictates the kind of culture you're going to have, you know, and that's kind of something about that I'm just trying things out loud. So I have I'm going to do some personal things now, and then I'm going to do with go back to some of the design issues. So I dug out this letter a girl wrote me in 1985, a fellow Interlochen graduate. And so this is a kind of, don't worry. I mean, this is this person and I were friends. There's nothing terribly intimate, thankfully, in this letter, because we were not intimate, although we were friends. And this is a letter I never was written to me after we had just graduated, and I never wrote her back, and I don't know why. I mean, this was a problem in that era, and that I was very problem that I had in that area. I had a lot of difficulty writing back people, which is kind of a shame because I'm not a bad writer, you know, when they would write me. And part of the reason for that is that I was never happy with the sentences I wrote. And my feeling at that time is that if it wasn't perfect, I wasn't going to write it. And that was the wrong thing to do. The right thing to do would be just to get the damn thing written and be polite and be cordial and respond in kind. Probably my life would be very differently. Had I responded to this letter, I probably would be living in New York City. I mean, she's a big acting, really, really great theater director now. It's Delisa White. I think she's friends on Facebook. But I brought this out because of its sort of retro quality, as you'll see soon. Well, first of all, look at the paper. And look at the handwriting. So we're going back to June 30th, 1985. I'm going to do a close reading in its usual style of this letter and kind of analyze it a little bit. I mean, appropriately, not just part of it. Dear Mitch, so how's life as a high school graduate? Pretty good, I hope. I went to the local public high school commencement yesterday. I want to pause there for a second. Yes, I mean, this is typical of the penmanship, handwriting, this kind of, when they taught cursive, yeah, that's another thing too, is this is from an era, things all connect. The Playboy magazine connects to this cursive, connects to, you know, it's a whole entire era. It connects to this whiteout, right? Anyhow, I didn't mean to interrupt it, but what I was going to say about that commencement is, she went to Interlaken, but she still took time after graduating because I guess the the proceedings happened in a different time of the year. I guess a few days later or earlier, not at the same time as our graduation, to go to her public high school. So this shows great, on her part, emotional intelligence. You would have never caught me dead. Well, first of all, I wouldn't have known how to get there to any Tampa public high school graduation in the 80s. It wouldn't even occur to me. First of all, I'd been too busy working at the family business to go to a ceremony. I went to my ceremony in Michigan, and that's it. But she attended, so I'm thinking, you know, she probably had friends from her town, and it opened up a whole world of a very different person than myself, which connects to her cursive, you know. So it's interesting. So I broke the flow of her letter to talk about the fact she went to 2 ceremonies, but it fits, right? But listen to what she says here. This is interesting. High school commencement. They wore these cheap white and red robes. They went up randomly, handed the officers cards with their names on them, and were, what does it say here? Were something empty. Oh, handed empty diploma jackets. Okay. For the recession, the swing choir sang "We Are the World." Remember, this is 1985. Quincy Jones just passed. "We Are the World, We Are the Children," Better Day, that famous. She goes on to say, it was incredibly tacky. It made me pretty proud to be going to Interlaken. And she says it's ... after that there. So she just dissed this school's interpretation of "We Are the World." We should bear in mind that Quincy Jones, the producer, composer, was one of the great musicians of his or any era, and that's one thing he did. He did many, many things. And, you know, it's you know. So she goes on to say, summer's been pretty boring so far, but it looks like it's going to pick up. I'm up for a job as a switchboard operator in a seminary. Sounds interesting. ... This is the reason. Now we're getting to the reason I chose this letter. Next Wednesday, I'm going to a concert by one of those awful, she underlines awful, where are we here? Yeah, awful. She writes haha, see haha right here. New wave groups called Tears for Fears. All right, we're into some deep Gen X. Okay, this is we've left the 70s, now we're clear. She's announcing to me in this letter that there's this new group called Tears for Fears. Gets better. They happen to be my favorite band. Okay. Mona, Mom. Yeah, Mom's picking up the tickets today. I'm going with my former roommate, Lisa Schlauder. Actually, Lisa was at the reunion. Lisa Schlauderbeck, I think, just this past month. So I think that's how you pronounce the last name. Lisa Schlauderbeck and her guy, I guess that means boyfriend, Guy James. I also have to visit some colleges. So that's all I'm going to... She says she's reading Crime and Punishment for pleasure. Right. I've just been reading Crime and Punishment. And, yeah. Wow. So that's a little bit of, she says at the end here, take care, Delisa. I love you, Delisa. I love this letter. I have not seen you since '85, but you're directing plays and you made a great life for yourself, and I'm happy for you. And I only divulge this because of the, aesthetics of the paper and the cursive and the Tears for Fears and the time capsule aspect of it, which is, after all, one of the things our show's about. Which brings me to, let's see here. Too many books and too little time, right? So you can see in the preview that I've talked about this book before on this show, The Strip, and I've also talked about this book about. I have an entire book on these chain restaurants. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to talk about McDonald's and Burger King, and I'm not going to, but it's kind of interesting. I'm thinking about universality, the attempt at universality, and there's some passages in here we're gonna have to deal with because one of the things that Philip Langdon talks about in this book is this shift in our entire society from one style, dominant and dominating style, to another. And I'm going to read from a chapter called The Browning of America. Now, how America got brown. It was a response to the pastel, fuchsia-dominated, called Googie, 50s and 60s style of public restaurants, I guess. And I think he has examples of the Googie or Googie or whatever that, I don't know how you pronounce that. It's not Google. Maybe the people that invented Google are older than myself and maybe have some, I don't know, I'm just wondering. But it's, this flip-flop, this cycle of bright colors, somber brown, earth tones, bright colors, because as you know, bright colors in the 80s would return. In a Depeche Mode concert, or Frankie Says Relax concert, or Tears for Fears concert, Michael Jackson, etc., etc. But I just thought it'd be interesting to read from some of this Browning of America. And so he has this overleaf here. I love these physical books that I've got, He has this. So this is Denny's. Yeah. That's a lot of America looks like that. The design and the layout, not just Denny's. And so he tries to humanize what could be a boring or overtly technical phenomenon, you know. And he tries to talk about the people. So everything is designed from the ceiling that's above me. That's not popcorn. It's more flat design. Most ceilings are popcorn. I'm not going to put my camera up there. To the cork on this flooring. The chip in this very computer I'm speaking to comes from here geographically, and that's a whole other subject of this rare quartz, and computers can go on and on and on. Raw materials. Well, anyhow, there were people that invented things, and so he has this passage that's almost a little bit like journalism or even fiction prose, talking about these guys, you know. So I'll try to make it somewhat interesting for you. And I think I'll skip some things that are too dull. On a Saturday morning in 1964, one Thomas Wells was working in his architectural office in Honolulu when he got a phone call from a California restaurant executive, John Reuben McIntosh. McIntosh had opened a 12-stool restaurant in Corona del Mar, California in 1948, and had gradually expanded it into a series of snack shops. So this is one of his snack shops there. Snack shop. Okay. I don't know. Snack shop. Now, he had an idea for a future restaurant, an idea he thought about so briefly that he still had no name for the new enterprise and called it simply the Podunk Restaurant. The idea was to establish a coffee shop, eventually a chain of coffee shops, that would serve hamburgers, malts, and a few other uncomplicated menu items, but would maintain a noticeably higher quality than competitors. He wanted Wells to think about what sort of architecture would fit the concept. Wells had strong feelings about what should and should not be done. Now, this is interesting. These are two guys that, you know, that are in the restaurant, food and beverage. We now would say food and beverage business, I guess. Saying, let's make a bunch of places people are going to go to. And, you know, in a sense, they're creating a world. They're creating, the world might not last. It might be replaced by all glass, an open floor or beam construction or whatever these terms. I mean, of course, this is now very, very dated, but at the time, this was all, you know, people creating something new, a new way to have coffee in a Danish or a tuna fish sandwich, right? So he didn't want to produce anything in the usual googie coffee style. And this is a quote from him: weird plaster shapes meaning absolutely nothing, as he put it. To Wells, the aggressively conspicuous coffee shops of places like Denny's and Sambo's represented just a cheap Las Vegas approach to architecture, an attitude of anything goes. So this guy is very moralistic and high-handed. This as many businessmen are, as you know, there's a connection between often the, trying to choose my words carefully, the kind of self-righteousness and sort of capitalist libertarianism and no government kind of ethos. Is a kind of a, some of these guys can be kind of full of themselves and think they're saving the world when they invent something, you know, a little bit. And it's a little bit of that here. So, and the way you do that is you denigrate something else. So like, well, there's all this evil, decadent, fuchsia and hot pink. And this is not good. And we need to have a more serious, you know, I want our fast food to look, you know, more serious and more, well, more virtuous, right? I mean, you understand, I don't believe any of this stuff. I mean, I believe that I believe that you might really hate a fuchsia wall, you know, you might not want to eat surrounded by Pepto-Bismol walls and fuchsia walls, and you might want to eat with like wild, crazy designs because you're bored and that's what you like. And you might think that such stuff is just tacky. You know, much like Delisa White objecting to her this public high school commencement as being tacky. This is all aesthetics. And you might want something that's all brown, you know. But these things aren't really objective, you know. We're not talking about you know, these are, I would say, argue at least part relative concepts, you know, right? So, but the people that sell these things, the society at large does not see it this way. It's, you know, everybody has to be on the same page. It's one size fits all. And so I'm going to get to basically he condemned all these type of restaurants. Everybody that started to do a coffee shop, this is him continuing to opine on this. Everybody started to do a coffee shop, thought they had to look weird. Well, recall years later. I told John McIntosh, if you want to be different, let's do a nice, quiet, well-landscaped building. And so it goes on. It starts in Hawaii and it spreads, you know, everywhere, right? This idea of quiet. And there's a description here of, you can see, it's quiet. It said it emphasized natural materials like redwood and lava rock on the interior, and on sunny days its wooden doors could be folded back to let the dining area expand outward onto a comfortable patio. So that's a good example. I like Philip Landon's descriptions of buildings because he's an architect, an architecture critic, and design, so he kind of knows how to, you know. It says inside the Denny's were wood beams, wood trim, a working fireplace, tables whose plastic laminate tops were decorated in wood patterns, and a floor that was carpeted, right, deep pile carpet, rather than surfaced in terrazzo. And there was red brick on the outside, and, you know, this thing spreads. Tom Wells, as he looked at the changed landscape in the 1980s, remarked, "I feel like I designed this entire country." So in a way, does Tom Wells designed the United States? Because of course people copied him, and then people copied the people who copied him, and, you know, and it spread to fine dining, and probably even went into Los Angeles and New York City, and, you know, not the exact same thing, but forms of the same thing. And so such it is with, like, sort of with any kind of thing that's created, you know, with these guys are talking about thinking in universal terms. They want their thing to travel. They want their thing to be everywhere, you know, and they want everybody to not just consume it, but experience it, to use a phrase that probably they would have used then. To be it and to experience it. So this is the thing. I don't know if I want to deal with the strip. I do love this book, and I think I'm gonna. It's about American Midwestern. There's some great images in it, and kind of and there's great interviews in it. I think I'll return to it at some later time. This is in the style of what you would call an ethnography. So the writers look at a place called the Carousel, which is a motel and restaurant, and sort of interview the people that work there and try to, you know, understand, you know, the main owner. And of course the time period is similar to so in a book like this, you would have interviews like this. And they interview the housekeeping staff and the managers and the accountants. And so that's what makes it sort of ethnographic, is sort of they're studying. It's like doing field work. Instead of doing field work in Borneo, or, you know, you're doing field work in East Lansing, Michigan, you know, and studying this strip, you know, and looking at it. Here's some Christmas decoration here. Speaking of Christmas, this is the Carousel. Where is this? Is this Idaho? I'm trying to think about where this is. I don't know. Yeah, Iowa City. It's all Iowa City. So they usually, ethnographies usually focus in on a kind of a place like that. I think I'm going to get personal again and show some images of different places I've lived over time. So this is me in the 70s on my swing. And this is, I would say I was 8. So '76, bicentennial 77. This is me on a swing. Oh, wow. The date's on here. 76, so 70, yeah, 78. So, this is me on a swing. You notice anything unusual about, well, other than the fact that I'm on this swing and there's that tree, look at what's around me. This is what you would call the industrial, non-residential part of Tampa, Florida. And so that's all different plants and factories and manufacturing places all around. It's not a place where anybody lived, really. But we live there. So that's a kind of a strange area to grow up. It's, that's where you have loading and docks. It's kind of strange, isn't it? If we fast forward to use an analog, possibly analog expression to the 90s, I lived in an apartment in the mid-90s that was in a building that had formerly been a musician's housing, but it since shifted to just kind of, apartments. And so because it had formerly been a music school of some kind, look what was above this is the place where I live. Look, the Musicians Mutual Relief Society. And look what's up there. Mendelssohn, Beethoven, and Palestrina? Crazy. So every window has these different composers. And I was here for a good 6 or 7 years. I would say between 93, 98. And this is kind of what it looked like inside a little bit. I had a white piano then. It's me, 96. These are glimpses into my life and to the world's life, or at least Iowa City or America's life. So what is the meaning of all this? Well, in future episodes, I'm going to deal with some actual artistic creation that is universal and commercial, because the people are kind of squarely aiming at those kinds of results and that kind of project. So I just picked up another writer who passed recently, Bill Zemmy's biography of Carson, Johnny Carson, and it's a book called Carson the Magnificent, and I'm sort of making my way through it. It was his passion project. It was he died before he was able to finish it, and it came out a couple months ago, and I'm reading that. And Bill Zemmy was a great writer in the Chicago tradition of Mike Royko. Does that name ring a bell? Studs Terkel. That, although he's a little more celebrity oriented in his writing than those two men, but I don't know, Phil Donahue, I don't know, Chicago. And he wrote a biography of Frank Sinatra, Regis Philbin. So he's kind of in a way perfect, so to write about the universal. So we're going to talk a little bit about Johnny Carson. So I'm going to propose something in this episode. I'm going to discuss both Johnny Carson and David Letterman in different times. I want to say that they both are in a way geniuses. They both forged utterly individual styles. And both of them are true artists that probably aren't seen as such for all sorts of complex reasons we can get into. But in terms of they created this thing that was unique, that affected people, and it's sort of artistic in form, and also reflected their eras so well, And so I kind of think it'd be fun to invoke the Copyright Act in future episodes, and of 1976, and show some clips. Don't know what those will be. I'm organizing all that now, but I don't have it quite all finally organized, So holiday season is upon us, and we spent an hour talking about odd things, but they all connect because they're all things humans make. And we're also going to return, we're going to continue with John Updike Rabbit novels, and we're going to talk about things that aren't so popular and aren't so universal. After all, our very first episode, one of our first episodes was with an avant-garde filmmaker, John Jost. So there's that. Can't get more opposite to Johnny Carson and John Jost. They're both named John, but other than that, they're pretty different. And so we will come back to things that are a little more, shall we say, highbrow and rarefied, perhaps. But I think it's important to talk about stucco and formica and cement. The invulnerability of cement. The Cadre Gallery on the 19th. Yes, that's coming up. Brick, cement, water, and ultimately, of course, soil, air, oxygen. These are things, universals, if anything is universal. And so I think it's interesting to think about that. And I got the idea on the Amtrak train. I thought, well, what if we can't get Tom Wells, but I can read from Tom Wells's quote. I mean, he's probably not with us anymore, but and some of this coffee. And think about January and February, the new year, because I'm going to do that series where I learn a piece of music, and I'm in an episode where I learn a piece of music. Surprise guests that I haven't discussed yet. And things of that nature. So you consider this Saturday, December 7th, a little bit of all about aesthetics, but also it's a little bit of a Saturday at 5 as opposed to Friday at 5. And I hope you can stay warm if it's cold where you are. And I do sincerely hope you have if not a great weekend, at the very least a decent or serviceable weekend, and Sunday. And I will see you very soon. I'll see you next Sunday, the piano concert and Cadre Gallery, and probably some things I forgot to mention. I'm sure every episode I do, there's always, I forgot to mention this, I forgot to mention that. I talked about this boring thing. There was this interesting thing that I forgot to mention, but such is the life of improvisation and spontaneity, which is our life, all of our lives. And I think we're maybe the better for it. And so I thank you, and I say good night, and see you soon.